transit app crashed on the worst possible morning. Not completely, just enough that the real-time bus tracker went blank right when I needed it most. I was standing outside my apartment on Dundas West, with my coffee thermos empty and my phone showing me a spinning wheel where the number 501 streetcar was supposed to be. February in Toronto does things to your patience. The wind comes off the lake and finds every gap in your coat and makes you feel like the city is personally annoyed at you. I gave up on the app and started walking east toward the nearest Tim Hortons, which was 4 blocks away and not the direction I wanted to go. I pulled my toque down and told myself it was fine. It was not fine. I had a client presentation at 9 and my laptop bag kept slipping off my shoulder, and the sidewalk had that particular gray slush that looked solid but wasn't. That was how I ended up at Maple and Stone. I had walked past it probably 40 times without going in. It sat on the corner of Dundas and Ossington in a narrow building that used to be a dry cleaner. Someone had put in big windows and warm lighting and a small chalkboard outside that said things like single origin pour over and oat milk on tap, the kind of place I always assumed was full of people who had strong opinions about grind size. But it was right there, and I was cold, and I needed coffee more than I needed to be right about anything. Inside, it smelled like dark roast and cardamom. There were maybe 8 tables, all small, mismatched wooden chairs, one long bench seat along the wall. A few people with laptops, jazz playing low enough that you didn't have to acknowledge it. I got in line and unzipped my coat and finally started to feel like a person again. There were 2 people ahead of me, and then there was her. She was near the front of the line, already close to ordering. Dark wool coat, dark hair pulled back in a way that looked deliberate rather than rushed. She had one hand resting on the strap of a leather bag, and she was looking at the menu board with the same expression I imagine accountants have when reviewing someone else's budget. Focused, evaluating, like she was deciding something more important than a beverage. I don't know exactly when she turned, but she did. And she caught me looking and didn't look away. Most people do that small social flinch when you accidentally make eye contact in a queue. They glance down or slightly past you. She just looked at me. Steady, a little curious, the way you might look at a word you almost recognize but can't quite place. I looked down first. My coat zipper suddenly needed a lot of attention. She ordered a cortado with 2% milk, said it like she'd said it 10,000 times, and knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't going to be talked into anything else. Her voice was clear, not loud, just clear, like someone who was used to being listened to. When I got to the counter, I ordered a black coffee. Then something happened that I still don't entirely understand. I said, and I'll get hers too, whatever she just ordered. The guy at the till, young, beard, AirPods around his neck, pointed toward a small payment terminal off to the side. You want to cover the cortado? Yeah. He shrugged and ran it through. I stepped back. I was not the kind of person who did that. I had a routine. I got my coffee. I caught my streetcar. I sat in the second-to-last car because it was always less crowded. I arrived 8 minutes before I needed to. I did not make spontaneous gestures towards strangers in independent coffee shops on Wednesday mornings in February. And yet, she was waiting for her drink near the end of the counter. I went and stood nearby, not too close, with absolutely no plan. When the barista called out the cortado, I picked it up and slid it toward her. She looked at the cup, then at me. I didn't ask for that, she said. I know. So why? I'd had approximately 40 seconds to think of an answer, and I had wasted all of them. You looked like you knew exactly what you wanted. I found that impressive. She stared at me for a second. That makes no sense as a reason to buy someone coffee. I'm aware. Something moved in her expression, not a smile exactly, but something adjacent to one. She picked up the cup. Thank you, she said, and walked to a table near the window, opened her laptop, and proceeded to behave as though none of that had happened. I left feeling simultaneously like I had done something brave and something foolish. Half a block later, I realized I'd forgotten my gloves on the counter. I went back. She was still at the window table. When I walked in, she was already looking at the door, not surprised, not amused, just watching, like she'd been keeping one eye on the entrance the whole time. I grabbed my gloves and gave her a small nod. She tilted her cortado cup slightly in what I decided to interpret as acknowledgement. The streetcar came eventually. I made my presentation. My client said words like compelling and aligned with our Q2 priorities. Normally that would have been enough for the day. It wasn't. The next morning, my usual Tim's was right there. I walked past it. I told myself Maple and Stone was on the way to the streetcar stop if I cut through the alley. That was technically true and entirely dishonest. She wasn't there. I went Thursday, not there. Friday, same thing. I stood at the counter with my black coffee and looked at the window table, which had a guy with a gaming laptop in it, and felt genuinely ridiculous. I didn't know her name. I knew she drank cortados with 2% milk, and that she had a leather bag, and that she looked at people like she was reading something behind their eyes. On Saturday, I almost stayed home. It was cold again. Properly cold, -18 with the wind chill according to my phone. I put on my coat anyway. She was there. Same table, same posture. Laptop open, one hand wrapped around her cup. She looked up as the door opened, like she'd been listening for it. Our eyes met for the second time, and this time neither of us looked away first. She just waited. I ordered my coffee slower than I needed to. I thought about going straight to the door. I thought about walking over and saying something embarrassing. I split the difference badly. When my coffee came up, I walked to her table and stopped and said, "This is going to sound worse than I mean it." She looked up from her screen. "That's a confident opener. Is this seat taken?" "It is now, I suppose," she said, and closed her laptop. I sat down. I became very aware of the specific weight of my jacket and the position of my hands, and the fact that I hadn't thought any further than getting to the chair. She watched me figure this out. "You came back," she said. "The coffee's good here. You don't think that?" I laughed once involuntarily. "It's decent." She looked at me with something that was almost patience. "You came back Tuesday and Thursday." I set my cup down. "How do you know that?" She took a slow sip of her cortado. "I'll tell you eventually." She did not tell me that day. I learned over time that eventually meant when she was ready and not a moment before. Her name was Dara Vachon. She said it the way people say things they've had to spell out their whole lives, clearly, with a slight pause after, like she was giving you a chance to ask. I told her my name and she repeated it once under her breath, like she was filing it somewhere. "What do you do?" she asked. "Urban planning. Municipal stuff, mostly infrastructure assessment, some community consultation." She thought about that. "So you tell cities where they're going wrong and they pay you to be ignored." "That's more accurate than our website suggests. And you find that satisfying?" It wasn't a question exactly, more like she was checking something. "Sometimes," I said, "less lately." She nodded like she'd expected that. She told me she ran a small investment firm. "Not big funds," she said, "mid-market, private companies, the kind of businesses that had been around for 20 years and were trying to figure out what the next 20 looked like." She'd built it from a junior analyst position at a firm on Bay Street. No family money, no shortcuts. She'd been given rather than earned. She said all of this plainly, the way people state facts when they're long past needing anyone to be impressed. "Why did you leave Bay Street?" I asked. She looked at me over her cup. "Because I was making other people rich and I was tired of getting a thank you card at Christmas." After that morning, the table at Maple and Stone became something we both pretended was accidental. I would arrive around 8:15. She was almost always there first. For the first week she kept working when I sat down, just acknowledged me with a small lift of her chin and kept typing. Then one morning, without any announcement, she closed the laptop the moment I put my coffee down. I noticed. She noticed me noticing. "Don't," she said. "Don't what?" "Make that face where you think something has shifted." "Has something shifted?" "My inbox is less urgent than usual today. That's all." I kept a straight face. She almost didn't. The mornings piled up, not dramatically. No moment where a hand touched across the table and strings played. Just coffee and small things she said that I thought about for the rest of the day. She had a color-coded system for her phone calendar that she defended with the seriousness of someone who had watched chaos destroy something important. She didn't take calls before 8:30 unless a deal was actively closing. She hated the phrase "circle back" and would leave a meeting if someone said, "Let's take this offline," more than once. She remembered things I mentioned once. A rezoning project I thought was going to get killed in committee. The fact that I took the streetcar because I genuinely liked watching the city from ground level. That I had a younger sister in Vancouver I called every Sunday and sometimes ran out of things to say. "Why do you keep calling if you run out of things to say?" she asked one morning. "Because she knows I called," I said. "That's the point." Dara was quiet for a moment. That's a kind way to think about it. Coming from her, that landed differently than it would have from anyone else. One morning I told her work had started to feel off. She didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "that happens to everyone." She just waited. So I kept talking. I said I knew how to do the job. I knew how to run a consultation session and read a site assessment report and write something that sounded like a recommendation, but was really a way of telling a city councilor what they'd already decided. "I'm good at it," I said. "That might be the problem." She turned her cup slowly on the table. "You're performing competence instead of actually doing work." "Yeah, you know what that means. It means I need to change something. It means you already know what to change and you're waiting for someone to tell you it's okay." She looked at me directly. "I'm not going to do that, but it sounds like you should stop waiting. That should have been annoying." It wasn't really. It was the most useful thing anyone had said to me in a year. By the third week, the table felt less like a coincidence and more like somewhere I was supposed to be. One Thursday she came in with wet hair and a look on her face like she was managing something she wasn't going to explain. She sat down and didn't open her laptop. "Bad morning?" I asked. "Site visit tonight. Industrial client. Mississauga." The kind where everyone arrives having already made up their minds and you spend 2 hours proving you've done your homework. "I've been to that meeting," I said. "Different sector, same meeting. They always want you to tell them what they want to hear dressed up as your independent analysis, and you don't. I can't afford to. One bad call and the whole thing unravels." She paused. "You could come." I looked at her. "Not to the meeting," she said. "There's dinner first. Industry people, some of my clients. You're good at rooms where people are performing. You told me that in a roundabout way." I said I understood infrastructure assessment. Same skill. She didn't smile, but her eyes did something. "Wear something that doesn't look like you're about to go canvass a neighborhood." I met her at a restaurant on King Street, one of those places where the menu is 4 items and everything costs what a grocery run used to cost before inflation ate the middle class. Dara was already at the table when I arrived. Black blazer, simple earrings, a glass of sparkling water in front of her. She looked at me when I walked in and gave one small nod like I'd passed a checkpoint. The dinner was exactly what she described. 8 people, most of them 10 to 15 years older than us, talking about interest rates and cap rates and a federal housing announcement they were all skeptical of for different reasons. Dara was the youngest person at the table and also the clearest. She didn't over-explain herself. She waited until something was worth saying and then said it precisely. A man named something forgettable with a firm handshake cornered me early and started explaining the Ontario commercial real estate market as if I'd never heard of Ontario. I asked enough questions to seem engaged and found a way to redirect him towards someone across the table who genuinely wanted to know. 20 minutes later, Dara appeared beside me while I was caught with a woman describing a mixed-use development in Oakville at length. "They need you over there," Dara said, nodding vaguely toward the other side of the room. I excused myself immediately. "I owe you," I said quietly. She was on her 4th mention of the landscaping feature, Dara said. "We're even." Later, near the end of the evening, we ended up by the window while the room sorted itself into smaller conversations. The city outside was doing that Toronto winter thing where the cold makes everything sharp and the streetlights catch the ice on the road and it looks almost deliberate. "You're better at this than you let on," she said. "I grew up watching my dad navigate city council meetings. You learn to read rooms. It's not something you said before. You didn't ask before." She looked at me and I said her name. Just Dara, not as a preamble to anything else, just the word. She held eye contact for a second and then looked down at her glass and said, "We should go." The cab up to her building on Annex site was quiet, not uncomfortable, just quiet. We hit a red light at Spadina and neither of us said anything, and it was fine. Her knee was near mine and when the car turned north, it stayed there. Outside her building, she stood with her keys in her hand and looked at me. "Do you want to come up?" she asked. No edge in it, no test. Just the question. "Yes," I said. She unlocked the door and I followed her in, and it didn't feel like something beginning. It felt like something that had already been building for 3 weeks and had finally found the right moment to say so. The next morning was easier than I expected. I woke up in her apartment to the sound of the coffee grinder, which I thought was an optimistic sign. Her place was neat in the way of someone who doesn't tolerate disorder, not because it stresses them out, but because they've decided that clutter is a drain on attention. Books on a shelf in categories, one framed print above the desk, architectural, black and white. Her cat was sitting on the kitchen counter looking at me with the specific disappointment of a cat who had opinions about guests. She poured my coffee without asking how I took it. Black. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her do this, and thought about how small a thing it was, and how much it told me. We talked about nothing important. The dinner, the man with the handshake, the woman from Oakville who had apparently also explained the landscaping feature to Dara's client unprompted. Dara laughed once, a real laugh, not the small managed thing she usually allowed herself. She looked briefly surprised by it, like it had slipped out. When I left, she walked me to the door. I was finding the right way to say something non-needy and reasonably honest when she said, "Same time Thursday, Maple and Stone? Unless you've decided Tim Hortons was adequate this whole time." It wasn't. "Thursday then," she said, and closed the door. I walked to the Spadina subway, caught the train south, and spent the whole ride thinking about the fact that she'd said Thursday, not tomorrow, not a day, a specific day. That felt like something. Monday, I arrived at 8:15. Her table was empty. I ordered my coffee and answered emails on my phone and told myself she was running late. She wasn't running late. She just wasn't there. Tuesday, same thing. Wednesday, I almost went back to my old morning routine. I walked as far as the Tim Hortons on Dundas, stood outside it in the cold for about 30 seconds, and then kept walking. I got to Maple and Stone, and she wasn't there, and I sat at the window table, which felt wrong, and drank my coffee faster than I should have. I went over everything. The morning, the cab, her kitchen, the cat that didn't like me. Thursday, she had said Thursday. I was not misremembering this. By Thursday, I had started to wonder if I'd misread the whole thing, not just the last week, all of it. 3 weeks of Saturday mornings and Tuesday conversations and a dinner on King Street, and I was back to being a man who sat in a coffee shop alone, waiting for someone whose last name I'd only learned 2 weeks ago. My phone buzzed Thursday afternoon, a number I didn't have saved. "Hey, Merchant's Tavern, 7 p.m. if you're free." I stared at the message longer than I should have. Then I typed, "I'll be there," and put my phone face down on my desk and tried to do some work. Merchant's Tavern was East End, a small bar in Girard, with good draft and mismatched stools and a chalkboard of specials that changed depending on what the kitchen felt like doing. Dara was at a corner table when I got there, jacket still on, a glass of water in front of her. She looked composed, the way people look when they've decided how a conversation is going to go and are waiting for it to start. "Hi," she said. "Hi." I sat down. The silence wasn't comfortable this time. It had weight in it. "I handled Thursday badly," she said. "You didn't come, I know. After telling me Thursday, I know." She didn't make excuses for that. She just let it sit there. "I'm used to controlling things," she said. "My schedule, my decisions, what I let close. I have systems for everything. And I didn't fit the system. You didn't fit anything, actually." She looked at me directly. That was the problem. We ordered food neither of us was really there to eat. When the server left, she put both hands flat on the table, a gesture I'd come to recognize as her version of deciding to say something real. "My parents had a business," she said. "Small import company, Quebec suppliers, sold across Ontario. They trusted a partner they'd known for years. He moved money around in ways they didn't catch fast enough. By the time they understood what was happening, the company was done. I was 16. She said all of this the way people report facts they've made peace with, but not forgotten. So I decided very early that caring about something without understanding it completely was how you lost it." "So you learned everything," I said. "I learned to make sure I was never in a position where someone else's carelessness could take something from me." "That's a lot of work," I said. It became normal. I told her things too. More than I'd meant to. About my job and how I'd started to feel like a prop in a process that had decided its conclusions before I arrived. About how I was 31 and good at things I no longer cared about and didn't know how to say that to anyone who expected me to have it figured out. She listened the way she did everything, completely, without interrupting. At one point, her hand moved across the table and covered mine briefly. Then she pulled it back like the honesty had caught up with her. Outside on Girard, the night felt manageable again. Almost. We stood near the curb, and I was trying to figure out the right question to ask next when she said, "Before anything else, there's something I need to tell you." Something tightened in my chest. Okay. She took a breath, not the small controlled one she usually allowed, a real breath. The first morning at Maple and Stone wasn't random for me. Write in the comments. Was I wrong to feel like the ground had shifted when I found out Dara had planned our first meeting? Or does it matter less than what happened after? The first morning at Maple and Stone wasn't random for me. I looked at her. What do you mean? Your firm was mentioned in a conversation I had with a city planning contact in November. I looked you up. Professional history, a few public presentations, a Q&A you did with a municipal journal. You had a consistent routine. I found out your usual coffee spot was closed that morning because they posted about it the night before. She paused. Maple and Stone is 2 blocks from my office. I knew you might end up there. The traffic on Girard kept moving. I was aware of it. You put yourself in line, I said. Yes. The looking, the not looking away. I wanted to see what you were like in person before deciding whether to say anything. And the coffee, I said. You didn't plan that. No, I didn't plan that. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked like she didn't know exactly where to put herself. I thought I was creating an opportunity, a controlled introduction. And then you weren't what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who was good at their job and fairly easy to read. She looked at me. You were harder than that, and you kept coming back. And then it stopped feeling like something I was managing. I looked down the street for a moment. A streetcar was passing on the tracks 2 blocks east, yellow light moving through the dark. Everything that had felt accidental was rearranging itself in my head. The way she'd held my eyes. How she hadn't seemed surprised when I came back. How she'd known about Tuesday and Thursday. I need a couple of days, I said. Okay, no argument. No attempt to pull me back toward her. You should have them, she said. I caught a cab going west. Through the back window, I could see her still standing on the sidewalk under the light. She didn't look like someone who was used to watching people leave on terms that weren't hers. I spent the weekend doing ordinary things badly. I went to the grocery store and bought things I didn't need and forgot things I didn't. I watched 2 hours of something on TV and couldn't have told you what happened. Sunday, I called my sister in Vancouver, and this time I actually had things to say, which meant she knew something was wrong immediately. What happened? She said. Someone I met. Something I found out. Good or bad something? I thought about it. Complicated something. She let that sit for a moment. Is she worse than complicated? I didn't answer right away. That's an answer, my sister said. Here's what I kept coming back to. And I kept coming back to it because it wouldn't leave me alone. Dara could have never said anything. There was no mechanism that would have forced that out of her. I would never have known. The whole thing could have stayed clean and slightly mysterious, and I would have gone on believing the first morning was a coincidence, and we had both just been lucky. Instead, she told me in a moment when it could have cost her everything, when things were finally easier between us, when I'd just told her things I hadn't said to anyone else. She told me then, on purpose, because she'd decided it mattered more to be honest than to protect the version of things she'd built. That was not the action of someone who was still just managing a situation. I texted her Saturday afternoon, Maple and Stone, tomorrow, 8:15. Her response came back in less than a minute. I'll be there. When I walked in Sunday morning, she was at the table by the window. No laptop, no notebook. Both hands around her cortado, looking at the door. She looked less prepared than I had ever seen her, which for Dara meant she looked almost like a regular person. I got my coffee and sat down across from her. She waited. You built the first moment, I said. You decided where to stand and when to arrive and how to look at me. And then when I came back, you let me think it was all coincidence. You let me believe I was making the moves. Yes, she said. That hurt, not because it was calculated, because I had started to trust my own instincts around you. And it turned out those instincts were partly working off a stage set. Her jaw tightened slightly. She didn't defend herself. I hear that, she said. I need you to actually hear it, not file it and move on. I hear it, she said again, and this time it was different. Quieter. I was protecting myself. I know that's not an explanation. I know it cost you something. I looked at my coffee, then at her. But everything after that first morning, I said. The Thursdays. The things you said about work, the dinner, your kitchen, the way you close your laptop, none of that felt managed. Her fingers moved near her cup. It wasn't. I know. I said it before I'd fully decided whether I knew it. But I did know it. That was the thing. I know it wasn't. She reached into her jacket pocket and set something on the table. A small folded square of paper. The kind that comes from tearing a page out of a notebook. She slid it across to me. I opened it. 4 words in her handwriting, small and exact. No more controlled introductions. I held the paper for a moment. Then I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. From here, I said, no positioning, no information advantage, no deciding what I get to know because the plan works better that way. From here, she said, I'm not saying I'm fine with it. I wouldn't trust you if you were. That almost made me smile. She picked up her cortado and I picked up my coffee, and outside the window Dundas was doing what it always did in the morning, slow and gray and full of people with somewhere to be. The streetcar went by, number 5 heading east. A kid on a bike cut through the slush on the sidewalk, and a woman with a stroller gave him a look that could have stopped traffic. Maple and stone, same table, same window, same 2 cups. But this time I knew exactly what I was doing there, and so did she, and that made it something different than a coincidence. Something you choose,